Hello and welcome back to Now Read This, The Chronicles of Prydain, Book 5, The High King, by Lloyd Alexander, Chapter 13, Darkness. In the days that followed, the companions strove to overtake the cauldron-born and again fling themselves across the path of the retreating warriors, but their progress was agonizingly slow. Taran knew Cole had spoken truly when he had called the hills of Bran Galed both friend and foe. The rocky troughs and narrow defiles, the sudden drops where the ground fell away sharply into frozen gorges, offered the companions their only hope of delaying the deathless host moving onward like a river of iron. But at the same time, from the high crags of the west, gusts of snow-laden wind battered the struggling band with icy hammers. The winding trails were slippery and treacherous. The ravines held deep pits filled with snow, where horse and rider might founder beyond rescue. In the hills, Taran's most trusted guide was Lassar. Sure-footed, long used to mountain ways, the comet youth was now shepherd to a different, grimmer flock. More than once, Lassar's keen senses kept the companions from the icy traps of snow-hidden crevices, and he discovered pathways no other eye could see. But the progress of the ragged band was none the less slow, and all suffered cruelly from the cold, men and animals alike. Only the great cat, Liane, showed no concern for the bitter blasts that drove frosty needles against the faces of the companions.
"She seems to be enjoying herself,"
Fluda sighed, huddling in his cloak. He had been obliged to dismount, for Liane had suddenly taken it into her head to sharpen her huge claws against a tree trunk.
"And so should I," he added, "if I had her coat."
Gurgi ruefully agreed. Since entering the hills, the poor creature had grown more and more to resemble a drift of hairy snow. The cold had even stopped Glue's endless whining. The former giant pulled his hood over his face, and little could be seen of him but the frostbitten end of his flabby nose. Eilonwy, too, was unwontedly silent. Her heart, Taran knew, was as heavy as his own. Yet Taran forced himself, as far as he was able, to put grief aside. His dogged pursuit had at last brought his warriors within striking distance of the cauldron-born, and now he thought only of the means to slow their march to Unuvan. As at the Red Fallows, the companions laboured to build barriers of tree limbs and set them across a narrow gorge, toiling until the sweat drenched their garments and froze in the bitter wind. This time the livid warriors overran them, mutely hacking away the branches with their swords. In despair, the men of the comets clashed hand to hand with the oncoming foe, but the cauldron-born slashed mercilessly through their ranks. Taran and the comet men sought to block the way with heavy boulders, but even with the help of Heaven's mighty arms, this labour was beyond their strength, and the toll of the slain only rose higher. The days were a white nightmare of snow and wind. The nights were frozen with helplessness, and like exhausted animals, the companions found respite amid rocky overhangs and the scant shelter of the mountain passes. Yet concealment served little purpose. The presence of the comet warriors was known, and their movements quickly sighted by the enemy captains. At first, the cauldron-born had chosen to disregard the ragged band. Now the deathless marchers not only quickened their pace, they swung closer to Taran's riders, as though eager to join battle. This puzzled Fluda, who rode beside Taran at the head of the column. Taran frowned and shook his head grimly. "I understand it all too well," he said. "Their power had waned when they were farther from Unuvan. Closer, it returns to them, and as we grow weaker, they grow stronger. Unless we halt them, one time for all, our efforts will do no more than sap our own strength. Soon," he added bitterly, "we shall defeat ourselves more sharply than Aron's warriors could ever hope to do." But he said nothing of another fear that lay in all their hearts. Each passing day showed more clearly the cauldron-born were turning south, away from the hills of Bran Galed, and once again toward the swifter, easier way of the Red Fallows. With dour satisfaction, Taran judged this to mean the enemy still feared the pursuers, and would strive to any lengths to be rid of them. Snow fell that night, and the companions halted, blinded by the whirling flakes and by their own weariness. Before dawn, the cauldron-born attacked their camp. At first, Taran believed only one company of the mute warriors had overrun his outposts. As the Comet warriors sprang to arms amid the terrified shrieks of horses and the clang of blades, he quickly realized the entire enemy column was slashing across his lines. He spurred Melonlas into the fray. Fluda, with glue clinging to his waist, was astride Leanne, who sped in great bounds to join the embattled defenders. Taran had lost sight of Eilonwy and Gurgi among the rush of warriors. Like a ruthless sword, the cauldron-born had split the Comet horsemen's ranks and were streaming through unhindered, crushing all who stood against them. All day, the uneven battle raged, while the men of the Comet struggled vainly to rally their forces. By dusk, the path of the cauldron-born was a bloody wake of wounded and slain. In one deadly blow, the cauldron host had broken free of their pursuers to move swiftly and unfalteringly from the hills. Eilonwy and Gurgi were missing. Fearful and dismayed, Taran and Fluda pressed their way through the shattered remnants of the warband, struggling to regain their ranks. Torches had been lit to signal rallying points for the stragglers, who stumbled wounded and bewildered among the bodies of their fallen comrades. Throughout the night, Taran searched frantically, sounding his horn and shouting the names of the lost companions. With Fluda, he had ridden beyond the battleground, hoping for some sign of either one of them. There was none, and the new snowfall, which began toward dawn, covered all tracks. By mid-morning, the survivors had gathered. The passage of the cauldron-born had taken heavy toll of both mounts and men. Of the Comet warriors, 1 out of 3 had fallen beneath the swords of the deathless foes, and of the steeds, more than half. Luegor galloped empty-saddled. Eilonwy and Gurgi were among neither the slain nor the living. Desperate now, Taran made ready to search through the farther hills, but Fluda, his face grave and filled with concern, took Taran's arm and drew him back.
"Alone you can't help to find them," warned the bard. "Neither can you spare time nor men for a search party. If we're to stop those foul brutes before they reach the fallows, we shall have to move with all speed. Your Comet friends are ready to march."
"You and Lassar must lead them," Taran replied. "Once Eilonwy and Gurgi are found, we'll join you somehow. Go quickly, we shall meet soon again." The bard shook his head.
"If that's your command, so be it. But as I have heard it, Taran Wanderer it was who called the Comet folk to his banner, and for the sake of Taran Wanderer they answered. They followed where you led, for none other would they have done as much."
"What then?" Taran cried. "Would you have me leave Eilonwy and Gurgi in danger?"
"It is a heavy choice," Fluda said. "Alas, none can lighten it for you."
Taran did not reply. Fluda's words grieved him all the more because of their truth. Hevid and Lassar had asked no more than to fight at his side. Lonio had given his life at Caer Dathil. There was no Comet warrior who had not lost kinsman or comrade. If he left them to seek Eilonwy, would she herself deem his choice good? The horsemen awaited his orders. Melonlas impatiently pawed the ground. "If Eilonwy and Gurgi are slain," Taran said in an anguished voice, "they are beyond my help. If they live, I must hope and trust they will find their way to us." He swung heavily into the saddle. "If they live," he murmured. Without daring a backward glance at the silent, empty hills, he rode toward the warband. By the time the Comet men were on the march again, the cauldron-born had well outdistanced them, and were moving without delay to the foothills of Bran Gallad. Even at their fastest pace, halting only for moments of fitful rest, the Comet warriors regained little of the precious time that had been lost. Each day, Taran strained his eyes for a sign of Eilonwy and Gurgi, hoping against hope that the princess would find some means of reaching the warband again. But the two companions had vanished, and Fluda's desperate cheerfulness and assurance that both would appear from one moment to the next rang false and hollow. At mid-morning on the 3rd day of their march, an outrider galloped in with tidings of strange movements in the pine forest at the column's flank. Taran halted his warriors, hastily ordering them to stand ready for combat, then rode with Fluda to see for himself. Through the trees a little below him, He could make out no more than a vague stirring, as if shadows of branches flickered across the drifts. But in another instant the bard shouted excitedly, and Taran quickly sounded his horn. From the woods tramped a long procession of short, stocky figures. Garbed in white cloaks and hoods, they were all but invisible against the snow, and not until they had begun to move across a bare stretch of rocky ground could Taran distinguish one marcher from the next. Their stout leather boots, laced and bound with thongs, barely showed below their cloaks, and looked like nothing so much as rapidly moving tree stumps. The shapes that bulked on their shoulders or at their waists were, Taran guessed, weapons or sacks of provisions.
"Great Bellin!" cried Fluda. "If that's who I think it is."
Taran had already dismounted and was racing down the slope, waving at the bard to follow him. At the head of the band, which seemed to number well over 100, trudged a familiar, stumpy figure. Though he too was heavily muffled in white, his crimson hair flamed out beyond the fringe of his hood. In one hand he carried a short, heavy-bladed axe, and in the other a thick staff. He had caught sight of Taran and Fluda and strove to meet them. In another instant the bard and Taran were clasping his hands, pummeling his burly shoulders, and shouting so many greetings and questions that the new arrival clapped his hands to his head. "Dolly!" Taran cried. "Good old Dolly!"
"I heard you clearly the first few times," the dwarf snorted. "If I ever doubted you recognised me, you'll fully convince me that you do."
He put his hands on his hips and looked up sharply, trying, as always, to appear as gruff as he could. Despite himself, his bright red eyes flashed with pleasure, and his features broke into a grin, which he tried, without success, to change to his usual scowl.
"You've led us a chase,"
Dolly declared, motioning the warriors to follow Taran up the slope.
"We had word you'd gone into the hills, but saw nothing of you until today."
"Dolly!" Taran exclaimed, still amazed at the unexpected sight of this long-absent companion. "What good luck brings ye to us?"
"Good luck," grumbled Dolly. "Do you call tramping day and night in snow and wind good luck? All of us fair folk are abroad, one place or another, orders of King Idelig. Mine were to find you and put myself at your service. No offence, but I could guess that if anybody in Prydain needed help, it would turn out to be you. So here we are."
"Gwistel has done his work well," Taran said. "We knew he was journeying to your realm, but we feared King Idelig might not heed him."
"I can't say he was overjoyed," Dolly answered. "In fact, he nearly burst. I was there when our gloomy friend brought word of your plight, and I thought my ears would split with Idalig's bellowing. Great gawks, lumbering oafs, giant clodpoles, all his usual opinions about humans, but he agreed willingly enough despite his bluster. He is really fond of you, no matter what he says. Above all, he remembers how you saved the fair folk from being turned into frogs, moles, and whatever. It was the greatest service any mortal ever did for us, and Idelig means to repay the debt. Yet the fair folk are on the march," Dolly continued. "Alas, we came too late to Caer Dathil, but King Smoit has cause to thank us. There's a host of fair folk fighting side by side with him. The northern lords are ready for battle, and we'll take a hand in that too, you can be sure." Dolly, for all his gruffness, was obviously proud of his own tidings. He had finished, with great relish, an account of one fray in which the fair folk had baffled the enemy by making an entire valley so resound with echoes that the foe fled in terror, believing themselves surrounded, and had begun another tale of fair folk valour when he stopped abruptly, seeing the look of concern on Taran's face. Dolly listened while Taran told what had befallen the other companions, and it was the dwarf's turn to be grave and thoughtful. When Taran finished, Dolly did not reply for a time. "As for Eilonwy and Gurgi," the dwarf said at last, "I agree with Fluda. They'll manage somehow, and if I know the princess, I wouldn't be surprised to see her galloping up at the head of her own army. With the cauldron born, we're all in dire straits," Dolly continued. "Even we fair folk can do little against such creatures. All the tricks that would gull a common mortal are useless. The cauldron-born aren't human. I should say they're less than human. They've no memory of what they were, no fear, no hope. Nothing can touch them." The dwarf shook his head. and I see that any victory we might gain elsewhere would be wasted unless we find some way to deal with that spawn of a Nuven. Gwydion is quite right. If they aren't stopped, well, my friends, among us, we'll have to do it, and that's flat."
By this time, the Fairfolk band had reached Terran's lines, and a murmur of wonder spread through the ranks of the Comet men. All had heard of the skill and prowess of King Idalig's fighting forces, but none had seen them face to face. Hevid the smith marvelled at their axes and short swords, pronouncing them sharper and better tempered than any he could make. For their own part, the fair folk seemed not the least uneasy. The tallest of Idalig's warriors stood barely higher than Lassar's knee, but the fair folk soldiers looked on their human comrades with the friendly indulgence they might show to overgrown children. Dolly patted Leanne's head, and the huge animal purred happily in recognition. The sight of Glue, hunched on a rock and staring sourly at the new arrivals, brought a cry of surprise from the crimson-haired dwarf.
"Whoever or whatever is that? It's too big for a toadstool and too small for anything else." "I'm glad you asked," replied Glue. "It's a tale I'm sure you will find most interesting. I was once a giant, and my present unhappy state comes, no more and no less, from a complete lack of concern from those," he looked dourly at Terran and the bard, "who might have been expected to show at least a small amount of consideration. My kingdom, yes, I would appreciate it if you addressed me as King Glue, was the finest cavern with the finest bats on the Isle of Mona, a cavern so vast."
Fluda clapped his hands to his ears.
"Leave off, giant, enough! We've no time for your prattle about caverns and bats. We know you've been ill-used. You've told us so yourself. Believe me, a flam is patient, but if I could find a cavern, I'd pop you into it and leave you there."
Dolly's face had turned deeply thoughtful.
"Caverns," the dwarf muttered. He snapped his fingers. "Caverns, hear me well," he said quickly. "No more than a day's march from here. Yes, I'm sure of it. There's a fair folk mine. The best gems and precious stones are gone, and Idalig's had no one working there as long as I can remember, but I think we can get into it. Of course, if we follow the main shaft, it should bring us out almost at the edge of the Red Fallows. You'll catch up with the cauldron ball in no time at all. With all our warriors together, we'll stop them one way or another. How, I don't know. That doesn't matter for the moment. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it." Dolly grinned broadly. "My friends, you're with fair folk now. When we do something, it's done right. The first half of your worries are over. The second half," he added, "might be something else again."
For the first time since leaving Caer Dallben, Glue appeared in good spirits. The idea of anything resembling a cavern seemed to cheer him, although the result of his improved temper was a further spate of rambling tales about his own feats as a giant. However, after a hard day and night of marching, when Dolly halted at the sheer face of a high cliff, the former giant began glancing about fearfully. His nose twitched, and his eyes blinked in dismay. The entrance to the ancient mine toward which the dwarf beckoned was no more than a fissure in the rock, barely wide enough for the horses, overhung with icicles glistening like sharp teeth.
"No, no," stammered Glue. "This doesn't compare with my realm on Mona. Not half the size. No, you can't expect me to go stumbling around a shabby den like this."
He would have drawn back, had not Fluda taken him by the collar and dragged him along.
"Have done, giant!" cried the bard. "In you go with the rest of us."
But Fluda himself seemed none too eager to lead Leanne through the rocky crevice.
"A flam is valiant," he murmured, "but I have never been fond of underground passages and all such. No luck with them. Mark my words, we'll be grubbing like moles before we are through."
At the mouth of the cavern, Terran halted. Beyond this point, there was no hope of finding Eilonwy. Once more, he battled the wish of his heart to seek her again before she would be forever lost to him. With all his strength, he fought to wrench those thoughts from his mind, but when at last he ruthlessly forced himself to follow the bard, it was as though he had left all of himself behind. He stumbled blindly into the darkness. At Dolly's orders, the warriors had fashioned torches. These they now lit, and in the flickering light, Terence saw the dwarf had brought them into a shaft that dipped gradually downward. Its walls of living rock rose no higher than Terrence's upraised hands. Dismounted, the comet men led their fearful horses past sharp outcroppings and over broken stones. This, Dolly explained, was not the mine itself, but only one of many side tunnels the fair folk had used when carrying sacks of gems above ground. Indeed, as the dwarf foretold, the passageway soon grew much wider, and the rocky ceiling soared 3 times Terrence's height. Narrow platforms of wood, one above the other, followed the walls on either side, though many had fallen into disrepair, and the beams had tumbled in a heap over the earthen floor. Lengths of half-rotted timbers shored up the archways leading from one gallery to the next, but of these some had partly crumbled, forcing warriors and steeds to pick their way most cautiously over or around the piles of rubble. The air was stifling after the icy wind above ground, and hung heavy with ancient dust and decay. Echoes flitted like bats through the long abandoned chambers as the warband moved in a wavering file, with torches raised high above their heads. The twisting shadows seemed to muffle the sound of their footsteps. Only the piercing whinny of a frightened steed broke the silence. Glue, who had not left off his complaining since entering the mine, gave a sharp cry of surprise. He stooped and snatched something from the ground. In the flare of his torch, Terence saw the former giant held a glittering gem as big as his fist. Fluda had seen it too, and he sternly ordered,
"Put that down, little man. This is a fair folk trove, not that bat-ridden cave of yours."
Glue clutched his find to his chest.
"It's mine," he squealed. "None of you saw it. If you had, you'd have kept it for yourselves."
Dolly, who had glanced at the gem, snorted scornfully. "It's rubbish," the dwarf said to Terran. "No fair folk craftsman would waste his time on it. We use better quality than that to mend a road bend. If your mushroom-faced friend wants to burden himself, he is more than welcome." Without waiting to be told twice, Glue hastily thrust the gem into the leather pouch dangling at his side, and his flabby features took on an expression Terran had only seen when the former giant was in the midst of a meal. From then on, as the companions progressed steadily through the mine, Glue's beady eyes darted everywhere, and he strode forward with unwonted energy and interest. The former giant was not disappointed, for soon the torchlight glittered on other gems half buried in the ground or protruding from walls. Glue fell upon them instantly, scrabbling away with his pudgy fingers and popping the glittering crystals into his sack. With each new find, he grew more excited, giggling and mumbling to himself. The bard looked pityingly at him.
"Well," he sighed, "the little weasel has at last sniffed out something to profit himself. Much good it may do him once we're above ground again. A handful of rocks. The only use I can see is if he throws them at the cauldron ball."
But Glue, absorbed in gathering as many gems as quickly as he could, paid no heed to Fluda's remarks. In little time, the former giant's pouch was crammed with jewels of bright red and brilliant green, with gems clear as water, or, in their glittering depths, flecked with gold and silver. Terran's thoughts were not on the abandoned riches of the mine, although the jewels seemed to grow more plentiful as the long column of warriors made their way farther into the tunnel. As far as Terran could judge, it was no later than midday, and already the companions had journeyed a considerable distance. And, as the tunnel widened and the path straightened, their pace gained even more speed. "Easy as whistling," declared Dolly. "Another day and a half at most, and we'll come above ground at the fallows." "It's our only hope," Terran said, "and thanks to you, the best hope we've had. But the fallows trouble me. If the land is barren, we'll have little protection for ourselves and little means to hinder the cauldron born." "Ah," cried Dolly, "as I told you, you're dealing with fair folk now, my lad. When we set to a task, there's nothing paltry or small about it. You'll see, something will come to hand."
"Speaking of paltry and small," interrupted Fluda, "where is Glue?"
Terran halted and quickly looked around. At first he saw nothing of the former giant. He lifted his torch and called Glue's name. A moment later, he caught sight of him and ran forward in alarm. Glue, in his search for treasure, had clambered up to one of the wooden platforms. Just above the arch leading to the next chamber, a sparkling gem as big as his own head was embedded amid the rocks. Glue, having swung precariously to a narrow ledge, was trying with all his might to dislodge it. Taran cried out to him to come down, but Glue tugged and heaved all the harder. Dropping the reins of Melonlass, Taran was about to swing up after him, but Dolly seized his arm.
"Don't do it," snapped the dwarf. "The beams won't hold you."
He whistled through his teeth and signalled 2 of the Fairfolk warriors to climb to the platform which, under Glue's furious struggle with the gem, had begun to sway dangerously.
"Hurry!" Dolly shouted. "Bring that idiot down here!"
Just then Glue's pouch, already filled to bursting, tore apart. The gems streamed down in a glittering shower, and Glue, with a yell of dismay, spun around to clutch at them. His foothold slipped. He clawed frantically at the platform, and as he did so, the arch gave way beneath him. Now shrieking not for his lost gems, but for his life, Glue flailed wildly and caught one of the swaying timbers. With a crash, he toppled to earth. Behind him the archway lurched, the ceiling rumbled. Glue picked himself up and scuttled madly from the hail of falling stones.
"Back!" Dolly shouted. "Back, all of you!"
The horses reared and whinnied as the warriors strove to turn them. With an ear-splitting crack, the upper platforms collapsed. An avalanche of boulders and broken beams thundered into the gallery. Blinding, choking dust filled the tunnel. The mine seemed to shudder all along its length, then settle into deathly silence. Shouting for Dolly and Fluda, Taran stumbled to the heap of wreckage. None of the warriors or animals had been caught in it. Behind them, the tunnel had held firm and kept them safe, but the way forward was hopelessly blocked. Dolly had scrambled onto the heap of stones and wood, and was tugging at the end of a long beam, but after a moment he stopped, breathless, and turned a despairing face to Taran.
"It's no good," he gasped. "If you want to keep on, we'll have to dig our way through."
"How long?" Taran asked urgently. "How much time dare we lose?" Dolly shook his head.
"Hard to say. Even with fair folk it will be a long task. Days, very likely. Who knows how far the damage has gone?" He snorted angrily. "You can thank that half-witted, undersized, 2-legged toadstool of a giant for it."
Taran's heart sank. "What then?" he asked. "Must we retrace our steps?" From the expression on Dolly's grimy face, he feared what the dwarf's answer would be.
Dolly nodded curtly. "We're badly delayed no matter what. But if you want my advice, I say turn around and go back. Make our way to the fallows above ground as best we can. The whole mine is weakened now. There'll be more cave-ins, and I'll miss my guess. Next time, we might not be so lucky."
"Lucky?" moaned the bard, who had slumped down on a rock. He put his head in his hands. "Days wasted. The cauldron-born will be in Anuvan before we have another chance at them. The only luck that would suit me now would be to see that greedy weasel under a pile of his own worthless gems." Glue, meanwhile, had ventured to crawl from under one of the remaining platforms. His garments were torn, his pudgy face smeared with dust.
"Days wasted," he wailed. "Cauldron-born, blocked up tunnels. Well, has any one of you stopped to consider I've just lost a fortune? My gems are gone, all of them, and you don't give a second thought. I call that selfish. Selfish! There's no other word for it."
Hey, you want to buy something? You can check the description for my books and audiobooks. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content.